Hi guys, welcome back to TV Spoilers. Today I'm going to reveal to you the haunting aftermath of the kidnapping that caused Dominic to face a mental breakdown. Dominic's psychological consequences. Abby and Devon's growing fear of Dominic's illness will make it difficult for them to forgive Mariah. Dominic came home after the kidnapping looking like a child who had survived it physically, yet carrying something shattered that adults couldn't immediately see. In Genoa City, people are used to shocks and secrets buried beneath polished manners, but for a little boy, the world is far simpler. Safe or unsafe, familiar or unfamiliar, his mother's arms are the terrifying emptiness that makes the heart clamp shut. Dominic, still too young to explain what happened in words adults would recognize, began to speak in another language. Instinctive reactions, wordless panic, fingers gripping until the knuckles blanched as if letting go for even a second would make the whole world collapse. Abby noticed first. Not in one dramatic moment, but through the accumulation of tiny details. Dominic clung to her so fiercely that if she stepped out of the room for a few seconds, he dissolved into sobs. He startled at the sound of a door. He pressed himself into Abby whenever a stranger approached, even if that person was harmless and meant well. Those behaviors, so easily dismissed as just being a kid, carried the unmistakable shape of a deeper, stubborn fear, one that made Abby ache and burn with anger at the same time, because she understood this was not a temporary phase. It was a long scratch that would carve itself into how Dominic would grow up and trust the world. Devon saw it too, but he processed it differently. He didn't only see his son's fear, he saw the consequence of choices that couldn't be undone, a life path bent by what Mariah had done. He tried to stay calm, but the calm often felt like thin ice over a storm. He watched Dominic the way you watch a warning sign. The child wasn't telling them in sentences, but his body and habits were telling them everything. Dominic had become hypervigilant, as if even his own home, once the most familiar place on earth, could betray him at any moment. Abby and Devon began to wonder what Dominic had sensed during the time he was taken, not necessarily a clear memory, but strange smells, strange voices, harsh lights, the shock of being ripped away from familiar arms too suddenly. And it was that suddenness that lingered the longest. The lesson that the worst thing can happen without warning. Abby, who had always tried to control her world through logic and planning, discovered there are wounds you cannot organize into submission. She could buy the best security money could buy, build the strongest walls, but she could not order Dominic's nervous system to stop trembling. While Abby and Devon wrestled with this new reality, Mariah stepped into it with a nearly desperate hunger to repair what she had broken. She returned carrying crushing guilt, and somewhere inside her she still clung to a fragile hope that her love for Dominic, however distorted by her actions, could become the bridge back to what they used to be. But Dominic was no longer the carefree child from before. He responded to Mariah like she was a danger signal. Maybe he couldn't know, in an adult cognitive sense, what Mariah had done, but he could feel the instability she brought into the room. He could feel the atmosphere change when she appeared. Abby's pulse tightening, Devon's eyes darkening, the air turning rigid like a wire stretched so taut it might snap. Dominic avoided Mariah, turned his face away, curled inward, and sometimes if she moved even a step closer, he screamed and cried, not in simple discomfort, but in outright terror. For Abby, that sound was a cut straight through the chest. It forced her to face what she didn't want to admit. This wound had reached the deepest layer of their family, and the person who caused it had once been among the closest to them. Devon looked at Mariah in those moments and felt two forces pulling in opposite directions. One part of him still wanted to believe people could be redeemed. The other part looked at Dominic and only felt the unmovable weight of fatherhood, a responsibility that did not allow him to gamble even once more. That was why Devon was the one to propose bringing in a child psychologist. Not to label Dominic or reduce pain to paperwork, but to find a map through the darkness. Devon understood they could soothe themselves with promises like time heals, but time only heals when it's supported the right way. Abby hesitated at first, not because she denied what was happening, but because she feared hearing it confirmed that her son had become traumatized. Some truths become heavier the moment they are spoken out loud. Yet Abby also knew avoidance would not lighten Dominic's burden. So they met with a specialist, someone who watched Dominic not only through his parents' descriptions, but through how he moved in the room, where his eyes went, how he clutched Abby like she was the last anchor in the room. The assessment didn't acquire theatrical conclusions. It was simple, and it was brutal. Dominic had trauma. He would need time, special support, and an environment that was stable and consistent so his nervous system could relearn what safety felt like. The psychologist didn't tell Abby anything she hadn't already suspected, and hearing it named still made her throat tighten, as if she wanted to scream at the unfairness of it. Dominic should not have to learn this lesson so young. That confirmation also pushed Abby toward a decision that, for her, became almost instinct, setting boundaries with Mariah. Not out of cruelty or revenge, but out of absolute priority for Dominic's stability. Abby understood that every time Dominic panicked, he reinforced the belief that the world was unsafe. If Mariah appeared and Dominic screamed, Abby would not force her son to get that used to it by enduring it, because that wasn't healing it. It was teaching a child that his fear didn't matter. Abby became firm. Mariah could not approach Dominic whenever she wanted, could not decide when reconnection would happen. Everything had to follow Dominic's pace, the specialist's guidance, the rule of safety first. Devon stood with Abby, and their unity wasn't a triumphant speech. It was a cold, steady agreement. They would protect their son at any cost, even if that cost meant closing the door to someone who had once been family. And this is where it becomes most painful. Dominic's psychological aftermath makes forgiving Mariah feel almost impossible, not because Abby and Devon want to hold onto hatred, but because each small step Dominic takes becomes living proof that the injury is still there. Abby can look at Mariah and remember the times she truly loved Dominic, but the moment Dominic recoils at the sound of her voice, every warm memory turns into a luxury Abby cannot afford. Devon can understand that Mariah is drowning in guilt, but when he sees fear in his son's eyes, compassion no longer has the right to stand in front of fatherhood. Mariah tries, maybe through patience, maybe by accepting distance, maybe by attempting to prove she is no longer a threat. Yet even that effort can become another shadow at Abby's part. Abby wants Dominic to heal, but hates the feeling that she has become the person blocking a reunion. Still, Abby knows the brutal truth. In stories like this, there is no way to save everyone at the same time. Some choices can only prioritize one person, and here that person has to be Dominic. What makes this arc haunting isn't a simple battle of right and wrong, but the helplessness in the face of an invisible crack. Childhood trauma is terrifying because it isn't loud like an explosion. It's quiet like water soaking into wood. You don't see it at first, but by the time you notice, it has spread deep. When Dominic screams just because Mariah steps closer, I can't help but thinking about the cruelest paradox of all. Sometimes the person you once loved the most can become the very thing your body fears most. Abby and Devon are doing the right thing for their son, but that right thing tastes bitter because it demands they accept their family will never return to what it was, at least not in the way they once imagined. And just when they think they've built a safe circle around Dominic, one question still hangs in the air like a hook at the end of the scene. If Dominic needs time and stability to recover, what happens the moment he is forced to face the memory of the kidnapping again in a way no one can prepare for? A voice, a face, or even a small situation that's enough to reverse his progress and drag Abby and Devon back to the exact place they feared most.